overnight.
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
And it's that time on a Thursday morning we speak to Leith Van Onselen from macrobusiness.com.au. It's the Treasury of Common Sense because all of this is economic news from a common sense perspective. Not always all that common, sadly, I have to tell you. G'day, Leith. I hope you're well, mate.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Luke. Thanks for having me again.
It's an absolute pleasure. Let's start at the predictable rental crisis, which is worsening given the numbers we've seen from a few of these firms that do the accounting of them.
Yeah, mate, it's an absolute disaster. It just keeps going from bad to worse, unfortunately. So we've had basically 3 reports come out in the last week or so, and the most recent was yesterday, basically showing that the rental crisis is getting a lot worse. So first of all, at the start of the month, CoreLogic released its monthly housing report, and it basically showed that the vacancy rate across the combined capital cities fell to just 1%, which was as lowest on record, basically.
Yeah.
And then PropTrack yesterday did their own, and then they also released their own rental vacancy rate. So they've all got different samples.
Yes.
But they also said a record low of 1%. So it was 2 from 2 of absolute shocker. And then and last week, Domain, which is a third private sort of data provider, released their September quarter rental price report. So that's basically rented that measures asking rents, and the inflation there is just off the charts. So basically, if you're looking for a unit rents went up just under 24% year on year in the year to September across the capital cities, and houses went up by just over 13% across the capital cities. So absolute disastrous numbers here, and Domain's chief economist Nicola Powell actually said that we're between 40 and 70,000 rentals short currently across the market. And basically, she said that's basically like sort of the entire population of Newcastle, or the total dwelling stock in Newcastle. We need to add that to the market to ease it. And she said that basically it's going to keep getting worse as long as this population growth through immigration keeps outpacing housing supply, which it's going to do for years, let's face it.
Yeah.
So, it's an absolute disaster. And obviously the root cause of this is obviously the extreme immigration we've had. In the June quarter, according to the National Accounts, the population grew by 626,000, which means we had about 500,000 net overseas migration. So you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that obviously these people who come in need somewhere to live. And it's sort of a double-pronged attack. So you've got the natural increase, and a lot of that is actually the Costello's baby bonus kids are now hitting, 20, around about 20 now. So they're sort of hitting that. So we had that little mini population bulge from 20 years ago when they brought in the baby bonus. And they're now hitting sort of household age where they need housing. At the same time, we've got this, 500,000 migrants arriving from overseas. So it's just created this absolute, tinderbox for the housing market, which just can't keep up. And, we're seeing it obviously with, thousands of Australians having to move into group housing now, and then obviously a massive spike in homelessness as well. Yeah. And there just doesn't seem to be a way out, to be quite frank. This immigration is going to, the monthly visa data from the ABS says that it's still going up. And so we're likely to have this extremely high immigration for several years. And at the same time as obviously builders are going bankrupt left, right and centre. We've got labour shortages in builders. Materials costs have had massive inflation over the past few years, so it's more expensive to build. Builders can't make profits on it, so they're not going to build it. And it's just an absolute nightmare scenario going on, an inequality disaster in the making, unfortunately. And the simple fix is obviously to, slow the migrant intake. We talk about it.
Of course it is. Yeah, and just for my listeners who will be screaming at the radio hearing this, and Leith and I have been talking about this, and Leith in particular, for weeks and weeks and weeks on this program. This is what's going on. This is the ultimate result, and it's not as bad as it probably will get. Vacancy rates of 1%, just not heard of. Rental increases of 25%, while everything else is going up. Nothing to do with your pay packet goes up by anything like this to help. And when you've got a government focused on one thing, which comes to an end, one would think, on the weekend, all this other stuff seemingly can't be dealt with. And this is a complete disaster brought on by your federal government, because they determine how many people come through the turnstiles. They end up around the country. They're foisted into states who don't have necessarily any more means to, and you're not going to build a house in a fortnight. So this is at the feet of the federal government. Please accept that. And if you're a person that doesn't own their house, in other words, you're a third of the population, a third are paying them off, a third own them, and a third rent. And you try and get a place to live, and you find something, miracle, then they tell you how much it is. Oh, okay, we can't do that. That's at the feet of this federal government right now. It can't be put any plainer than that. Leith, I have to ask you, mate, is there any will by policymakers anywhere to do anything about this?
No, it's all virtue signaling and basically talking about this mythical supply. We just need to boost supply, which is, quite frankly ridiculous in this environment that it's going to happen. And just to prove that point, that the whole Circus Act moved to Brisbane yesterday, actually, and about 1,000 delegates have gone to this 3-day national housing conference in Brisbane, and it's chaired by the Australian Housing Urban Research Institute, which is basically Commonwealth funded.
Yeah.
And it's a 3-day event, and guess what's not on the agenda? The immigration program.
There you go.
They basically want to talk about all this other stuff, like we need to plan in and building design and all this other stuff, all this other wishy-washy stuff, which even if you could do that stuff, it'd take years to get an impact, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of lead time with trying to force through all these supply side changes. You got to get the workers, you got to get the materials, you got to get the land, you got to, all these sorts of things we always talk about. But the one thing you can do with the stroke of a pen is curb the migrant intake, and that'll take the pressure off straight away. And there's just no will to do it. Like basically, it doesn't matter if you're a housing group, if you're a policymaker, if you're anyone from just about any side of government, you're going to basically point to the thing that's not causing the problem, which is the so-called supply side. And it's not a supply problem; it's a demand problem. And you don't fix a supply problem by ramping demand through number of people to levels we've never seen before. That just makes the situation worse. So, the whole thing's a complete farce, Luke. I've got to be quite frank.
It is.
So
Why?
sort of like, look over there.
Look over there, exactly. So they're captive to business, they're captive to unions. Why wouldn't government do the obvious thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, part of it's this thing we talk about every week. It's they're captive, obviously, to big business on the immigration thing, and the property lobby basically uses this supply argument to try and get lower taxes, tax breaks to do this build to rent stuff, to liberalise planning, which is good for them, even though they often just sit on it. Like we actually have hundreds of thousands of homes that have been approved but are not being built because it's not profitable to do it, or it's actually more profitable for developers to actually hold it from the market and push the price up. So, this whole notion that you just do it through planning, but obviously it's a great fig leaf to say supply, because then you can negotiate better deals for yourself to fatten your profit margins. Yeah. And obviously the business lobby wants all the extra people in the country. So for all the reasons you're talking about, easy way to, suppress wage growth, to also boost profits, that sort of thing. So, and unfortunately, probably the biggest lobbyist of them all now is the federal Treasury. The Treasury loves immigration because, as we've said every week, it stokes the federal budget because they collect all the company tax, all the personal taxes, but all the costs of immigration don't fall on the federal budget. They fall on the state budgets and on citizens at large, through paying for toll roads and, all these user pays fees to build all this new infrastructure. And the biggest example of this, Luke, is Anastasia Palaszczuk just announced this, I think it was a $4 to $8 billion desalination plan for Brisbane. And she wants to build it because the population's growing so quickly. Well, guess what? It's going to add $1,000 per year to everyone's water bills. And so they're building this thing to keep up with this massive population growth, which is driven by immigration, which then means because we're short of water everywhere, we're going to have to build desal plants left, right, and centre, so everyone's water bills go up. It's like, well, how about you don't cause the problem in the first place, and you don't add all the extra people needing water? Would be the logical thing to do. So it's, it's a case of privatising the gains and socialising the losses, and unfortunately, the losses are socialised on all of us through, if you're in Sydney paying to drive on a road where 20 years ago you could drive for free to get around because you had to build all these toll roads and pay Transurban because you've imported 1 million people. So it's just, it's just crazy stuff. And unfortunately, that's the way the country's going. And, the intergeneration report says we're going to have 14 million more people in the next 40 years. Well, guess what? We're going to have a battery of desal plants. Your water bills are going to go up. You're going to have toll roads everywhere. Everyone's going to be living in apartments. It's just a recipe for lower living standards and, higher living costs.
Yeah. Macrobusiness.com.au. You should get that and read that every day. You're up to date then with all that's happening in the economic world. Leith Van Onselen, thank you so much. Talk to you next week, my friend.
Yeah, thanks, Luke.